Since the late 1920s, the Soviet Union, through its GRU, OGPU and NKVD intelligence services, used Russian and foreign-born nationals as well as communist and people of American origin to perform espionage activities in the United States. These various espionage networks had contact with various U.S. government agencies, transmitting to Moscow information that would have been deemed confidential. First efforts. During the 1920s, Soviet intelligence focused on military and industrial espionage in the United States, specifically in the aircraft and munitions industries, and penetrating the mainline federal government bureaucracies, such as the United States Department of State and War Department. These efforts had mixed results. A front organization was created by NKVD agent in 1928 for the infiltration and placement of scientists into industry and government. The Federation of Architects, Engineers, Chemists, and Technicians. The FACT never attracted enough followers to make an impact in labor conditions, but it served the progressive cause in other ways. Browder and Galosh networks. One chief aim was the infiltration, placement, and subversion of American political life at all levels of society. Earl Browder, General Secretary of the Communist Party of the United States, served as an agent recruiter himself on behalf of Soviet intelligence. Browder later stated that, by the mid-30s, the party was not putting its principal emphasis on recruiting members. Left unstated was his intent to use party members for espionage work, where suitable. Browder advocated the use of a united front involving other members of the left, both to strengthen advocacy of pro-Soviet policy and to enlarge the pool of potential recruits for espionage work. The illegal residency of NKVD in the U.S. was established in 1934 by the former Berlin resident Boris Bazarov. In 1935, NKVD agent Iska Kamarov entered the U.S. with false identity papers to assist Bazarov in the collection of useful intelligence, and operated without interruption until 1939, when he left the U.S. Akamarov's wife, an American who worked for Soviet intelligence, was Helen Lowry, the niece of CPUSA General Secretary Earl Browder. Recent information from Soviet archives have revealed that Browder's younger sister Marguerite worked until 1938 as an NKVD operative in Europe. She discontinued this work only when Browder himself requested her release from duty, fearful that her work would compromise his position as General Secretary. In the 1930s, the chief Soviet espionage organization operating in the U.S. became the GRU. J. Peters headed the secret apparatus that supplied internal government documents from the Ware Group to the GRU. Browder assisted Peters in building a network of operatives in the administration of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. This group included Alger-Hist John Abd, and Lee Pressman. Courier for the group at the time was Whitaker Chambers. Browder oversaw the efforts of Jacob Galosh and his girlfriend, Elizabeth Bentley, whose network of agents and sources included two key figures at the Department of Treasury, Nathan Gregory Silvermaster and Harry Dexter White. One early Soviet spy ring was headed by Jacob Galosh. Jake Galosh was a Ukrainian-born Bolshevik revolutionary and Soviet secret police operative in the USSR. He was also a long-time senior official of the CPUSA, involved in covert work and cooperation with Soviet intelligence agencies. He took over an existing network of agents and intelligence sources from Earl Browder. Galosh's controller was the head of the NKVD's American desk, Gayko Vakimian, also known as the Puppet Master, who would later serve a key role in the assassination of Leon Trotsky. Galosh was the main pillar of the NKVD intelligence network. He had worked with Soviet intelligence from the mid-1930s, and probably earlier. He was not merely a CPUSA official assisting the NKVD but held official rank in the NKVD, and claimed to be an old-time Chekist. Galosh established a company called World Tourists with money from Earl Browder, the General Secretary. The firm, which posed as a travel agency, was used to facilitate international travel to and from the United States by Soviet agents and CPUSA members. World Tourists was also involved in manufacturing fake passports, as Browder used such a false passport on covered trips to the Soviet Union in 1936. At World Tourist, Galosh frequently met Bernard Schuster, an NKVD agent and Communist Party functionary who carried out background investigations for Galosh as part of the vetting process of agent candidates. In March 1940, Galosh pleaded guilty to being an unregistered foreign agent, paid a $500 fine, and served probation in lieu of a 4-month prison sentence. Soviet intelligence did not like Galosh's refusal to allow Soviet contact with his sources. The NKVD suspected Galosh of Trotskyism and tried to lure him to Moscow, where he could be arrested, but the U.S. government got to him first. But even then, he did not reveal his agent network. After Browder went to prison in 1940, Galosh took over running Browder's agents. In 1941, Galosh set up a commercial forwarding enterprise called the U.S. Shipping and Service Corporation, with Elizabeth Bentley, his lover, as one of its officers. Sometime in November 1943, Galosh met in New York City with key figures of the Perlo Group, a group working in several government departments and agencies in Washington, D.C. The group was already in the service of Browder. Later that same month, after a series of heart attacks over the previous 2 years, Galosh died in bed in Bentley's arms. Bentley then took over his operations. Secret apparatus. By the end of 1936, at least 4 mid-level State Department officials were delivering information to Soviet intelligence. Al-Jahis, assistant to Assistant Secretary of State Francis A. Julian Wadley, economist in the Trade Agreements Section, Lawrence Duggan, Latin American Division, and Noel Field, West European Division. Whittaker Chambers later testified that the plans for a tank design with a revolutionary new suspension invented by J. Walter Christie were procured and put into production in the Soviet Union as the Mark BT, later developed into the famous Soviet T-34 tank. In 1993, experts from the Library of Congress traveled to Moscow to copy previously secret archives of Communist Party USA records, sent to the Soviet Union for safekeeping by party organizers. The records provide an irrefutable record of Soviet intelligence and cooperation provided by those in the radical left in the United States from the 1920s through the 1940s. Some documents revealed that the CPUSA was actively involved in secretly recruiting party members from African American groups and rural farm workers. The records contained further evidence that Soviet sympathizers had indeed infiltrated the State Department beginning in the 1930s. Included were letters from 2 U.S. ambassadors in Europe to President Franklin D. Roosevelt and a senior State Department official. Thanks to an official in the State Department sympathetic to the party, the confidential correspondence concerning political and economic matters in Europe ended up in the hands of Soviet intelligence. In the late 1930s and 1940, the OGPU, known as the Political Directorate, used the U.S. as one of several staging areas for multiple OGPU plots to murder exiled Soviet leader Leon Trotsky. Trotsky, then living in Mexico City. It was American communists who infiltrated Trotsky's killer, the Catalan Ramon Mercader, into his own household. They were also central to the NKVD's unsuccessful efforts to free the killer from a Mexican prison. Sobel spying. Jacob Album and the Sobels were indicted on espionage charges by the FBI in 1957. All three were later convicted and served prison terms. The Zlatovskis remained in Paris, France, where the laws did not allow their extradition to the United States for espionage. Robert Soblin was sentenced to life in prison for his espionage work at Sandia National Laboratories, but jumped bail and escaped to Israel. After being expelled from the country, he later committed suicide in Great Britain while awaiting extradition back to the United States. Wartime espionage. During the Second World War, Soviet espionage agents obtained classified reports on electronic advances in radio beacon artillery fuses by Emerson Radio, including a complete proximity fuse. Thousands of documents from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics were photocopied or stolen, including a complete set of design and production drawings for Lockheed Aircraft's new P-80 shooting starfighter jet. Atomic bomb secrets. Joseph Stalin directed Soviet intelligence officers to collect information in four main areas. Pavel Fitin, the 34-year-old chief of the KGB First Directorate, was directed to seek American intelligence concerning Hitler's plans for the war in Russia, secret war aims of London and Washington, particularly with regard to planning for Operation Overlord, the Second Front in Europe, any indications the Western Allies might be willing to make a separate peace with Hitler, and American scientific and technological progress, particularly in the development of an atomic weapon. The Silvermaster spying. The United States Treasury Department was successfully penetrated by nearly a dozen Soviet agents or information sources, including Harold Glasser and his superior, Harry Dexter White, Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and the second most influential official in the department. In late May 1941, Vitaly Pavlov, a 25-year-old NKVD officer, approached White and attempted to secure his assistance to influence U.S. policy towards Japan. White agreed to assist Soviet intelligence in any way he could. The principal function of White was to aid in the infiltration and placement of Soviet operatives within the government, and protecting sources. When security concerns arose around Nathan Gregory Silvermaster, White protected him in his sensitive position at the Board of Economic Warfare. White likewise was a purveyor of information and resources to assist Soviet aims, and agreed to press for release of German occupation currency plates to the Soviet Union. The Soviets later used the plates to print unrestricted sums of money to exchange for U.S. and Allied hard goods. In August 1945, Elizabeth Bentley, fearful of assassination by the Soviet MGB, turned herself into the government. She implicated many agents and sources in the Galosh and Silvermaster spy networks, and was the first to accuse Harry Dexter White of acting on behalf of Soviet interests in releasing occupation plates to Moscow, later confirmed by Soviet archives and former KGB officers. Aftermath. President Harry S. Truman's Executive Order 9835 of the 22nd of March 1947 tightened protections against subversive infiltration of the U.S. government, defining disloyalty as membership on a list of subversive organizations maintained by the Attorney General. However, Truman was opposed to the McCarran Internal Security Act of 1950, calling it a mockery of the Bill of Rights and a long step towards totalitarianism.